think Lee's still away.
What?
Is Lee still away?
Yeah.
Hi, welcome everybody to our webinar tonight, Merchants of Light, the consciousness that is changing the world. People are still filtering in. We're going to give them 1 minute and then we're going to start the broadcast in a minute. Okay, well, welcome again to Merchants of Light. And before we get started tonight, I'm Bob Ginsberg. I'll be behind the scenes, and we're going to be treated to a wonderful presentation by Dr. Kovacs. Before I introduce Betty, I had a couple of announcements here, and that is for those of you who may be grieving the loss of a loved one or know somebody that's grieving the loss of a loved one, we are holding another brief retreat in Florida, in Fort Myers, Florida, in January. And members of attendees of this webinar are eligible for a discount. When you register, you put in the code merchants50, that's merchants50, and you get $50 off of the rate. And incidentally, right now there's a super early bird special, which are very, very low rates to begin with. That ends on Monday, so you'd want to do it before Monday and take advantage of both discounts. We have a raffle, which helps the foundation raise money. It's a mediumship raffle. You can buy a ticket on the foundation website. That takes place on December 23rd. There is an event for those that are in the New York area on December 14th, and that is two wonderful certified mediums, Gina Simone and Joe Peretta, will be doing readings. And lastly, check your slides that we'll be posting with your links to Betty's new book. And Betty Kovács received her PhD from the University of California, Irvine, in comparative literature and theory of symbolic and mythic language. She studied and taught in Europe and the United States, served many years as chair and program chair on the board of directors of the Young Society of Claremont in California, and sits on Forever Family Foundation's academic advisory board. Dr. Kovács is author of Merchants of Light, the consciousness that is changing the world, and a prior book, The Miracle of Death, There is Nothing But Life. Before I turn it over to Betty, I'd like to mention at the end of Betty's presentation, we will be taking questions and she'll be answering as many as she can get to. You can type your question into the question box either during the webinar or after she's done, and she'll address as many as she can. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Betty Kovács.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Fran, and for the entire Forever Family Foundation for making this possible and for everything else that you do. And also I want to thank Kimberly Saavedra of the Kamlak Center for all of the techie work that she does and all of the work that she does to help me get all of this work out. I'm very grateful to both of you. So let's begin. In Western culture, our evolution has been thwarted again and again by people in power who have done everything possible to deny, destroy, and censor anyone or anything that carried the blueprint for our evolution. And it's really basically about this blueprint that I want to talk tonight. Many of us never even knew that there was such a thing, but this blueprint is our sacred text wherever it appears, because it reveals the laws of nature and the laws of our inner life, the life of soul. We've always known that there are laws that govern nature and that govern our physical development, but it has not been so clear to us that there are laws that govern our inner life, the development of soul or psyche. And it is these laws that make a sacred text what we call sacred. In other words, a sacred text isn't sacred just because someone declares it to be so. It is sacred because it reflects in its text the inner laws of our development. Well, how is this blueprint carried? Well, it is carried by shaman, mystic, scientist cultures. And we didn't really know that there were such cultures that existed in Western culture, at the roots of Western culture, until the 20th century. These discoveries are phenomenal in helping us to know exactly what this blueprint is and what are the laws of our development, and that it was the most natural thing, it seems, in the world for these shaman, mystic, scientist cultures to develop. And the first ones that we know of in the West are the cave cultures. And in their paintings on the walls of caves, we see their spiritual life. And they're also on engravings on the faces of rocks. And this is especially true of the San Bushman culture and the Kalahari Desert, and now in Namibia and Botswana. The San people are remarkable, beautiful people. And they actually may have been earlier than the cave cultures, but just the artifacts that we have date this cave cultures as a little bit earlier. But it could have started in Africa and moved up to Western Europe, which goes all the way to Central Asia. But the engravings on these rocks and the San Bushmen have told us actually what they mean, and they really do reflect their journeys into the spirit world. Now, we don't have the kind of material that would tell us exactly what was going on in the paintings of the caves, but because the San Bushmen still in the late 1800s were existing and doing their rituals, they told people who were there to study them that they were part of the engravings and they knew what they were about. So this is a wonderful thing. By having this ethnographic material, we can understand the same things that appear in the caves. But this blueprint is also carried in dances, in music and rituals and chants. We don't think of a dance as having a particular structure that can reveal the laws of our inner nature. But if you've been to Crete, you've probably seen the spiral dance danced. And that is one of the most ancient rituals that of our ancestors, of the ancient world. And I will talk a little bit about what that structure reveals about the blueprint a little bit later. Music can awaken these principles, and writing and painting on the walls of pyramids. We did not know until the 20th century that the painting and the writing on the walls of the pyramids actually were maps, you might say, into the visionary life and into the journey to death, and a tremendous advancement and transformation of consciousness. There is a book that came out just in the last century. I almost passed out when I saw it in the bookstore because it was about the shamanic text of the pyramids. No one ever said that before. Also, there are megalithic monuments. These monuments are huge. I'm sure that most of you have seen these, and I'll have some pictures of them in a minute. But when I was younger, I thought, well, these cyclopean walls, these megalithic monuments were in Troy. I had studied that, but I was so amazed, and I think everyone has been amazed to realize that these megalithic monuments are absolutely incredible, and they are all over the world. And the builders, they're called actually the builders, and it is known that these people who were called the builders were initiates into the Egyptian mysteries of life and death. They were very significant visionaries. And of course, they understood the equinoxes and solstices, and their monuments reflect that. Sacred architecture, cathedrals and other temples in the past, not here in our country, but in the past, they were actually geometrically designed to not only reflect these laws of the inner life, but to trigger our movement into a higher consciousness. And of course, stories and histories carry this blueprint. Let me get back there. Just a second, I went too far. I taught for a quarter of a century myths, fairy tales, dreams, visions, and it was so exciting. The students were wonderful. We just discovered so many patterns in looking at these texts, and it was just very, very exciting class. And still, sometimes I run into my students and they still talk about how exciting it was to realize these patterns. And they have been written down or on papyrus, paper, or later passed down orally from one generation to the next. And it's very interesting because so much of those texts that carried our blueprint have been censored, but fairy tales are just thought of as insignificant tales. And that's one reason that we have them, I think, that they weren't censored. Well, we all have the potential to experience a higher and vaster consciousness than we need in everyday life. And that certainly is what this blueprint tells us, that there is a higher consciousness and that all of us are part of it. Henry Bergson said, we are all potentially mind at large. And he also pointed out that the function of the brain is mainly to limit our access to this universal mind so that we can function on a daily basis and not be confused. Universal mind, of which, if we can just imagine ourselves, all of us in universal mind, we are all, we want to use the metaphor of the Big Bang, we are all the stuff of the Big Bang, and we all become creatively individual creations, you might say, but we are all universal mind. And that has to be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain so that we can live in time and space on a daily basis. Well, when our ancestors around the world figured this out, and they figured that out by about 40,000 BCE, they created techniques to trigger their ability to experience universal mind or cosmic consciousness. Now, it's very interesting that how this happened all around the world. The shamanic culture began around 40,000 BCE around the world. It's as though when a few had probably had spontaneous experiences, then it started happening around the world. So if something's spontaneous, you know, you experience it, you want to experience it again, they develop techniques. This is the tragedy of our culture, is that these techniques were destroyed and censored so that many organized religions today do not have techniques for us to step into universal mind. But that was always a function of religion before. What did I do? Oh, goodness, well, we'll get to it. Okay. Well, what are some of those techniques? There's the sand do strenuous dancing and singing and repetitive sounds, drumming, chanting, clapping, and they go for hours and hours and hours. And these repetitive sounds actually sort of trigger them into an altered state of consciousness. And among the sand, I think about 1/3 of the women are shamans and 2/3 of the men. It's a way of life. And we now know that with various types of rituals, such as the sand do, that it triggers an integrative brain wave pattern So this brain wave gets started and it flows through the brain and integrates the various brain components. So, for so long we kind of laughed at ritual and said, well, it doesn't do anything. It's just, but we now know that certain rituals, especially the repetitive ones for the brain, create this brain wave that will integrate the various components of the brain. And that's been such a problem in our culture because we somehow fail to understand that, and we developed only one aspect of the brain, and that is the left brain, which is rational thinking. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get to later, but it has been very detrimental in our developing our inner world. Of course, for tens of thousands of years, people around the globe, all around the world, have used various sacred plants, and depending upon where they are, which one grow in that area. And in places such as in the desert, where the sand lived, there were no sacred plants, as far as I've been able to find out, and they didn't use them, but they developed other very strenuous methods. But we now are quite sure that in the cave cultures, plants were used. We now know that people did use them because some of the mushrooms have been found in the seeds of people who were found. And then there's a painful physical stimulation. We've all heard of that from India. Sensory deprivation, breathing techniques, various forms of ritual and music, isolation with silence and intention, the Native American vision quest. These are very, very powerful, what sacred intention can do, and how nature really does appear to work with the person who goes out into isolation. And the sweat lodge, of course. Now, when I began studying prehistory, I realized that when people talked about these things who hadn't used them or tried them, that it was embarrassing. And I knew that I would have to try to understand at least some of the techniques. I did work with Sweat Lodge, and that was very powerful. And also, of course, some of the breathing techniques and meditation and the sacred plants. I taught Minoan mythology and Greek, and certainly they use sacred plants in their rituals. And in their rituals, they knew that there was no death. And the sacred plants, if you do work with them, it's a very sacred ritual, and they will let you know what to do and what are the principles of your own development and actually where you were stuck. Just briefly, I have to say that one time I had an experience in which I really had an intervention, you might say, from the spirit world, and was told that I was addicted. And I thought, what am I addicted to? And they said, you are addicted to ordinary consciousness. And I realized that that was my culture's addiction. I had spent my life looking for a spiritual meaning in the world, hoping that there was. But of course, I got caught into the brain pattern, you might say, of my culture, in which I didn't know how to get beyond the rational mind. I really needed to break through that and break through the kind of addiction to it, as though it's the sole arbiter of reality. And that's what the Western world has thought for a long, long time. And I realized that my addiction was one that was encouraged in my culture. It was praised. You've got all kinds of adulation if you did well in the rational brain. But the spirit world wanted me to know. And it was with sacred plants that I was addicted. And this was my journey to dissolve that addiction so that I could be, so I could participate in the spirit dimension. Well, what does science have to say? They say, and a lot of research has been done on the brain, that the brain has a neurological mechanism for altered states of consciousness. We're not just hallucinating, as we were always told, and it ranges from a very mild visionary experience. And these are very powerful and very important. I don't think any aspect of our experience with the visionary world should be demeaned in any way. We can go from mild visionary experiences to a total state of mystic consciousness in which we experience the unity of all life, that universal mind as one, of which we are all an integral part. Andrew Newberg and Eugene DeCrilly are the ones who've done this research, and they say there is nothing we found in science or reason to refute the concept of a higher mystical reality. The wisdom of the mystics has predicted for centuries what neurology now shows to be true. An absolute unitary being, self blends into other, mind and matter are one and the same. And you know, in Western science for so long, the worldview was that there is nothing but matter. And, oh, well, what do we do with mind? Where'd that come from? Consciousness? Well, that must just be an offshoot of matter. I mean, it was really kind of a ridiculous thing, but that's what science told us for many, many years. Well, quantum physics. This has been, the writer Paul Levy said, and I loved it because I know it's true. He said, quantum physics is our dream to heal ourselves, because science has finally realized and come back, making full circle, to know that there is much more than matter. As a matter of fact, there are many dimensions of reality, and there is what we would call a spirit dimension or quantum field. And in the book, The Merchants, I give descriptions by mystics of the quantum field, and then descriptions by scientists, and you know it's the same. It's a very, very interesting thing that science was censored in 1620, and it could do nothing but study the physical world. So I don't blame scientists. They were actually censored by the church and could not study the physical world. So they finally came to the conclusion there was nothing but matter. But now they've come full circle, and they know that it is the eternal sea of consciousness that creates the universe. It is consciousness, not matter, that is the ground of all being. And I, like Fred Allen's Wolf, I've always loved this statement: matter is how spirit appears in the physical universe. It's all spirit, you might say, and the physical world is just more coagulated in a sense, but no difference between mind and matter. We also know through scientific research now that the heart is the fifth brain component, and it is the very center of the blueprint, center of the brain. Many meditations are centered in the heart, and all of the ancient shaman mystic scientist traditions knew that the heart was the center. And so now science is confirming that. And it's so much more powerful than any of the other brain components. Its electromagnetic field is 50 to 60 times stronger. It gives more, and this, I love this from heart math research, it gives more information to the brain than the brain gives to the heart. Its magnetic field is 100 times stronger than the brain. And it has a depth of feeling and emotion. Brain researchers now know that how we feel about an experience is one way of knowing whether it is true or not. Feeling is a way of knowing. And you know, in the past, we just so disregarded feeling. You know, the old saying of just give me the facts, I don't care how you feel. But the Egyptian culture knew that evolution cannot continue. It cannot unfold if we do not have that depth of feeling and love that is in the heart center. It is actually our organ of soul, and it connects us to spirit. It opens us up to the spirit dimension. And I think that the meditations through the heart center, heart math, they are very powerful meditations when you really focus on your heart and just feel that heart. It has such a huge field. You can feel a connection to other dimensions. And it's very interesting that if we are close to someone or by someone, the heart will start to maintain the same rhythm as the one next to us. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, that when we hug each other, the hearts touch and they synchronize. Well, those people in our past who became very good at using the techniques that they had developed for themselves were, and for themselves and the community, were called shamans. They really wanted all of the community to experience what they knew how to do. And the caves were wonderful structures, you might say, for that, because it's very labyrinthine, crawling in and low, and it changes your mental attitude. So I'm sure that that had a lot to do with it, the labyrinthine structure of the caves. But whole communities were structured around these techniques to experience universal mind, because once they had experienced it, they knew that without it, we cannot really create a loving community or a civilization, really. In fact, I think that what we need so profoundly is a connection to ourselves, to universal mind, so that we will create ways and art and communities so that our children can know from early on who they are and what they're really capable of. So the cave cultures, I've already talked about 40,000 to about 10,000. And even though perhaps you've been in the caves or you've seen the paintings, art is that which it's always important to experience again, because when you look at it, you get the feeling. This is in Lascaux, probably around 20,000 BCE. But every time I look at these pictures, and I don't have a lot of them, because you always have to get copyright and the right to use them, and I thank Kim for helping me do that. But these are just exquisite, moving, vital creatures. Again, and now now this is in Lascaux too, and this is a part of the text in which we know that the cave cultures experienced altered states of consciousness. All of the symbols are there for the shaman. The bird on the staff, he's about ready to take flight into another dimension. Erect penis is a symbol of an altered state of consciousness. And there's the bison who has been killed. You see the entrails coming out. And we know this from the sand, that there was the belief that with the death of the animal, who was so profoundly revered, in fact, people felt that the animal had a consciousness beyond theirs, that bison was giving the gift to the shaman to step into the spirit world, giving him the energy to do that. Now, here, the hands are really kind of an interesting thing. The wall was not seen as just a flat surface to paint on. What they felt they were doing is that the other dimension, spirit dimension, was right behind the wall, and by painting it on the wall, they allowed that animal to come through into time and space. And also with the hands of touching it, it meant that we were touching the spirit. We were making contact with it. By the way, it was over 20,000 years of a peaceful community that the cave cultures established, and probably 27,000 for the sand. Now, this is a sand painting, and you can see a very typical image of an altered state, part animal and part human. And this one I think is beautiful. This is a sand painting, and you see what looks like maybe arrows going toward the person or sticking in the person. Now, this exists in the caves. They call them the wounded man, and no one knew what that meant. Why were they being tortured? What was going on? Well, I think the sand have cleared that up for us, because they are able, the sand elders, the shamans, are able to dance themselves, as I said before, into cosmic consciousness. And they do it as a community. When someone told them that in the East, people sit in silence and in meditation alone to go into a higher state of consciousness, they felt so sad and couldn't imagine that someone would want to do that alone. It was a communal thing. And this is also, it's so interesting to me, is that they could create energy arrows. They're not physical arrows, but in a way they are in another density, but they could create the arrows and they would throw them at someone. And that person then, that cosmic energy, that consciousness within them would begin to awaken, so they could actually pass this consciousness on, ignite it in another person. There was a person, Bradford Keeney, who was playing music, piano music, and this music opened him up so profoundly that he had this flowing love coming from the heart and the vision of consciousness that was so beyond anything he could ever imagine. And it went on, he stopped playing, it went on all night long. And it was like a big ostrich egg, like it was coming out of an ostrich egg. But it's kind of scared him because he didn't know what he could possibly, he didn't know how to respond to it. So he went on to university, went to MIT, and then got his doctorate from University of Purdue. And he became a professor, and he was invited to South Africa as a visiting professor. And 2 weeks before he was to go, he had a dream in which he was actually shown a map of where he was to go, and he saw Bushmen there. And so he thought he would definitely do that when he got there. So he arranged his trip once he got there. And when he was crossing the desert, the Kalahari, he saw these Bushmen running toward him. And they said, "Welcome home. We've been waiting for you." And they told him about the ostrich, that they see this cosmic consciousness symbolized as an ostrich egg. Well, Bradford Keeney stayed there with the San, or he went back and forth for over 20 years. And he believes, as they believe, that they are the oldest people on the planet, and that it's a real origin of living in and knowing how to go into, I should say, cosmic consciousness. And he's done a lot of work of collecting material from them. And also they dictated to him their sacred texts. So we have that now too, in which they tell us, and these are, they say 60,000 years BCE, they believe, since that time. But let me just stop here too and mention a Canadian, really, who had an experience of cosmic consciousness. He was old Walt Whitman's doctor, Richard Maurice Buck. And he had spent the evening with friends talking about poetry, Whitman, Keats, Shelley, and Whitman. And he was very inspired by it. And on the way home in the carriage, he looked ahead and he saw that the city was on fire. And then he realized it's not the city, that the light was in him. And during that experience, he said it was like nothing he had ever experienced in his life, that he didn't know whether it was a few seconds or a few minutes, but that he knew during that experience that the heart of the universe is love, and that there is no death. It was so clear that he never feared it again, that we are all immortal, eternal, and that there would be a time when all of us would live in this state of consciousness. Now, the next culture that all of these we've discovered in the 20th century. Cave culture, San, that is Western culture, understanding kind of who they were. Let me say just quickly about the San Bushmen. The West did not know who they were, and they looked down on them, and people have said that they are a murdered culture. And it wasn't until 1936 that the South African government stopped selling licenses for people to go to hunt them. I mean, it's almost hard to believe, but that's true. And yet they're the most joyous people. I have a long chapter on them in the book. I am so grateful to know about them. Now, the megalithic builders, about 12,000, but actually that's what is said, but we now know that they were being built during the cave culture time. So while people were painting these beautiful caves, there were the megalithic builders who were building these monuments around the world. Let's look at some of them. This is very typical. This is in places all around the world. And what in the world is it? Why would, I mean, how in the world they got the stone there, we don't know either, but people think that their science was probably a science of resonance, that they may well have moved these great stones through resonance. We don't really know yet. But this stone is a sacred object. It is deeply rooted in the earth, and it is pointing toward the cosmos. And this is so important for our ancestors that we know how to connect to the energies of the earth and the energies of the cosmos, that it is actually within the individual, that at the heart center where these two realms meet, and we are the mediators of these energies. Now they would call their ancestors' energy or other spirit energy into them. And you might know of the Djed stone in Egyptian history. They, of course, did the same kind of ritual that we see in the Christian of the dying and resurrecting God. And when the dead Osiris would rise, it would be the raising of the Djed stone, and that means it's living. And our ancestors believed they could draw the spirits by calling the spirits into these stones. Scholars used to laugh at that, but I'm not inclined to laugh anymore. And here, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, there are many, many structures in Peru like that. We can't trust the age that we give these monuments, but inside there's writing that has been found that they think is 30,000 years old. Now, this is also a megalithic structure, the pyramids, and just magnificent structures that are so mathematically accurate. And for so long, we thought they were only in Egypt, but now we know that pyramids are all over the globe. They're all around the earth. And this is Kalanish circles. We don't entirely know what was going on, but there's something. The stones were chosen in a certain way for certain qualities, certain energies and circles. In UK alone, there are 1,000 such circles. They all had to do, however, with knowing the energies of the cosmos and the earth and helping them to be harmoniously working together. And this, of course, Stonehenge is so beautiful. We see the sun coming through. It's just absolutely beautiful picture. And we see how magnificent Stonehenge must have been. But now in Göbekli Tepe, there is a structure, well, a vast number of structures that have been found that are 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Stonehenge is about 3,000. And it may be 30 times larger. So something profound was going on around the world. And these people they knew geometry. In fact, it was from this tradition that we have math at all. These traditions, when they were censored, went underground. And it was from those traditions that we actually got science and mathematics. There's also one in Indonesia that's being excavated now. The very base of it may be 20,000 years old, and it's called the Mountain of Enlightenment, and it's still a sacred place there. Now, what are the other cultures? We've mentioned the cave cultures, the San, and the megalithic. The old Europe and Crete, I won't have time to say much about these, except all of these cultures that I'm talking about are cultures that are shaman, mystic, and in some cases, scientist cultures. I was so excited when I found out about the old European culture, which was actually understood, best of all, by Maria Gimbutas, who's an archaeologist at UCLA. And I spent a lot of time teaching. There's probably 500,000 artifacts that have been found. And so their text, they don't have a written text, but their text can be read through the artifacts. And it's a very joyful world, very much centered in heart culture. And their major ritual, which you see everywhere, well, you see it all over from the beginning, is the labyrinth. And in the labyrinth, there was that sense of going deep, circling deep into oneself. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Egypt, we now know that Egypt was highly developed, that there was a kind of universal science, they thought of it in that way, and that each temple was a chapter in that science. One temple, for example, is a temple of man, which is a temple of a man who has achieved cosmic consciousness. And we just didn't know these things. Egyptologists call them barbarians, but because we had not experienced these things, we couldn't see it in the cultures that did. And I think one of the things that will help us to survive the crises that we're going and are going through is the knowledge that has come to us miraculously in the 20th century through various scholars of these cultures that were profoundly spiritual, had techniques for us experiencing our vast and deeper reality. The Jewish First Temple now, we are told, Margaret Barker, wonderful scholar, with the texts that have also been found that were not found until the 20th century, we're able to know that that first temple was a shaman mystic tradition. And that it continued, that when that was destroyed in 621, it was terrible. The feminine dimension existed in Jewish tradition. It was the male and the female created the universe together. But at 621, she was destroyed. All of her images were destroyed. All of her sacred groves were burned. Many Jews took the wisdom literature, which was thrown away, it could no longer exist in the temple. They took it to Egypt, and it does exist as apocrypha and in other texts, some of it. So when that temple, that tradition was destroyed, everyone thought that that was it. In fact, not many people even knew that it existed, but it continued. We now know that first temple shaman mystic tradition at the Dead Sea, because the people who went there, we found those scrolls. Well, I say we, culture did, found the scrolls in the year that the war ended, World War II. And the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal that they were a shamanic continuation of the first temple tradition. And then if I jump down past the pre-Socratic to the Jewish revival of this first temple tradition was in Jesus. So it was a shamanic mystic tradition that the Jews kept trying to reestablish. And of course, once so much changed in the teachings of Christianity, of course, the Jews released it, but Jesus taught a secret tradition. We know that that tradition was taught for 300 years, and it was pre-Christian. It carried the blueprint for our evolution. And we know that from the Nag Hammadi texts, which were also found in the year that World War II ended in Upper Egypt. So it's interesting, isn't it, that people at the Dead Sea, the Essenes, did not like what was going on in the Second Temple. They said they carry the true covenant of Israel. And that true covenant was an attempt to carry those principles of our blueprint of who we are in terms of universal mind, and that we can have techniques to trigger into it, and then we have ways of learning how to maintain the knowledge and the wisdom that we gain from it. Now, jumping back up to 8, the pre-Socratic Anatolian Greek shaman mystic scientists. This is amazing. Peter Kingsley has done this work, and it's absolutely amazing work. That when I studied whatever I studied about Greek culture and the mystery school and so forth, I could never find anything about shamans. Well, Peter Kingsley has realized that the whole shamanic culture stretched all the way from Spain into Central Asia. And in Anatolia, on the coast of Anatolia, Turkey, these pre-Socratic philosophers, I just studied them as philosophers, thinking of them as rational people. They were very profound shamans and healers, mystics, scientists, ambassadors, and they, Pythagoras and also Parmenides, actually taught Plato. They were truly the ones who created all of the science and rationality that Plato was given credit for. Really, it comes from these pre-Socratic philosophers. And Plato, unfortunately, did not present them well. It kind of, he did not really present the deep mystic healing aspect of that culture. So it was somewhat lost in terms of people knowing about it. But because of Peter, we now know that it was 500 years until the birth of Christ, and it continued. It had to go south into Egypt when the Roman Church became a censor of everything other than what it was itself. So they went into southern Egypt and then over into Baghdad and then into Persia. But by the Middle Ages, when there is a Renaissance, they come back to Europe. But we didn't know anything about that. And that's a very, very profound group of people. Now, I had said about the labyrinth that it was a very ancient ritual, and it appears everywhere and engraved everywhere. And this is what that text tells us, that we go round and round and round until we come to the center of our deepest selves. And there we confront the divine, the cosmic mind, the Christ, not as other, but as self. And that basically, if one wanted to sum up the principle of the sacred text, it is that. But of course, it is so much more. Well, a major point I want to make is that we lost that blueprint in many ways, pretty much so, because of the suppression and repression by the Roman Church and the Habsburg state from the 4th century. Once Christianity became the dominant religion, then it was impossible to own a book that the church didn't approve of. The church burned Gnostic texts, Jewish texts, Arabic texts. It killed, truly murdered men, women, and children for centuries and destroyed whole cultures, temples, sanctuaries, mystery schools. This is what happened. And yet, that wasn't the first wave of repression. The Deuteronomist in 621, remember I said that the first temple tradition was destroyed in 621 by the Deuteronomist. No one quite knows who they are, but they wrote themselves into history by getting rid of the feminine dimension of the divine, direct inner experience. And they wrote much of the Pentateuch, or the Old Testament. And I'll get to the stories there, because those stories show exactly how the blueprint was repressed. But I have here that science repressed the blueprint, and it did. But I don't want to blame the scientists, because as I said before, in 1620, Europe was just on fire with Renaissance. I mean, scientists, mathematics, engineering, and studies of consciousness from London to Heidelberg, all the way into Czechoslovakia and the old empire of Rudolf. It was such an exciting period. But when the church got wind of what was really going on, they destroyed almost everything. And after that destruction, the scientists sort of tucked tail and went back to their home, wherever it was. And they knew that they could not study consciousness as they had been doing if they wanted to live. And so science was censored to only study the physical world. And it's ironic, isn't it, that it was the church that prevented science from studying the blueprint of our inner spiritual development. But as I said, that's come full circle now, because scientists have discovered quantum physics. Okay, this is the tree of life is told by Genesis, and everybody knows it. God forbids Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of life. They do, of course, and God curses the serpent who is there, and the soil, punishes Eve, punishes Adam, and then he says they will die. That, in fact, they were told that if they eat of it, they will die. Here, I'm back there. Which is exactly the opposite, of course, of what is true. But he condemns them to death and to dust. I'm so amazed when I still hear rituals that say from dust to dust. It's a dreadful thing. And God exiles them both from the Garden of Life, so they cannot become immortal. So what we see here, this is what we call the inverted myth. And when cultures want to gain control over people, they invert the myth so that we get a view of ourselves that is so powerless. God demands, this is what God demands. Now, this isn't God, this is the Deuteronomist, but it was given to us as a sacred text. This is not a sacred text because it does not follow the principles of the blueprint for our evolution, which is structured out of the organizing principles of the human psyche. It says we're to remain unconscious. We're not to eat of the tree of knowledge, and that we have to obey an outside power, and it is maintained by fear and punishment, that the female should be subjected to the male, that nature is cursed. And now we look at that and think, our ancestors loved nature. They entered into a spiritual relationship with it. And we grew up with this story of nature being cursed. Even the description of putting nature on the rack to torture her secrets out of her shows the relationship that early scientists had. And we are now going to have to change that relationship, and not just to save ourselves, but to understand those laws that work in nature, because there's same laws that work in us, and we are to be united with them. And also, God says that we should die, return to dust, and that we should not be like gods. Okay, this is the real mythic pattern, and you can download these because I think it's just a perfect example of what has happened throughout the world, is that when people want control or they don't understand, then they invert the pattern and try to make us feel as though we're nothing. But the real myth is we're not to remain conscious. Life is a process of becoming conscious. We don't look to an outside power. We seek an inner knowledge so we can make our own choices. Instead of male dominance, the pattern is that male and female are equal partners, just as that was true in early Jewish mythology. Instead of perceiving nature as cursed, it's sacred. And instead of perceiving ourselves as beings who die, we are eternal. And instead of perceiving ourselves as inferior beings, we are initiated into the knowledge that we are immortal, divine, and creative. Now, this is the pattern. We are immortal. There is no death. Consciousness continues. And now quantum physics will tell us the same thing. And we are divine. We're part of the divine explosion into creativity in time and space. We are creative. I've had several experiences of our creativity. Once I was back at Machu Picchu, and I saw my dead body on a gurney, and spirits were pushing it toward the Huayna Picchu, and I thought, oh great, I'm going to go to Huayna Picchu, and inside this great spirits I will be initiated. I will learn. And then as soon as they pushed me right up to the mountain, they stopped, and then suddenly everything opened in that way that the creative mind has of doing, in which suddenly you know that you are the mountain, you are the ancient ones within, you are everything, and you are divine, you're eternal, and you are creative. Another time when I must have been kind of forgetting that, I had a grandmother, great image of the divine feminine, come to me and wake me up and sing to me. And she sang a song, just saying the words, "You are the creators. meaning us, the human species, create your worlds to keep me well. That was so powerful to me to realize that we can't, if we crawl around like we're nothing, the world will die. It's our role to create, to keep creation alive, just as every aspect of nature must do the same. So I knew I needed to step up. Well, the inversion of the tree then is it's denied, you can't do it, you're punished, and it's death. And the real myth is it's a sacred gift. It's an initiation, and we know who we are, that we are immortal, not that we are going to die because we eat of the tree. Okay, this is 2500, it's Sumerian. And it's very clear, isn't it? To the left is the feminine divine with the serpent behind. And we have to keep in mind with the tree and the serpent and the feminine were always together because the serpent is the Kundalini energy which rises when you eat of the tree of life. Both the male god with the horns, they are saying, here's the fruit, eat it. It's not denied. The mythic pattern is not to deny it. See, I'm having, something's not going away. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you, Kim. This is Egyptian. There's no way to think of the tree without the feminine, and she is feeding the soul. And here, very clear, what the tree is. It nourishes. Here again, and here again. And here is an initiation that all women, the sacred tree, the fruit, and the women are handing it to the initiate to the left. Now, the Jesus story to the Roman Church was inverted because in the Nag Hammadi text, which gives us the story of a Jesus that follows the blueprint, we know that is a very important text, these Nag Hammadi texts, because they follow the principles, the organizing principles of the soul, of the psyche, of the blueprint. And in the Nag Hammadi text, this Jesus does not die for our sins. And he says experience is much more important than belief. And becoming Christ is more important than following. For example, I see that I'm running a little bit out of time, so I won't read these, but he makes it very clear, I am not your master. Because you have drunk, you've become intoxicated from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. But if you drink from my mouth, you will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him. And in other places, he said, you are the light. We all come from a place of light. And in these Nag Hammadi texts, Jesus teaches that the problem is not sin. It's not knowing. That's the problem. It's that we don't know. We've fallen asleep and we've forgotten who we are. Now, all of this was existing in the ancient world. These are the roots of who we are, but it was censored, repressed, and suppressed so that we didn't even know that this had existed. But it did exist, and it went underground. The Egyptian Hermetic arts we now know did exist, the Jewish Kabbalah, alchemy, Gnosticism, and the Christianity that Jesus taught, the hidden tradition, did maintain itself as mystic Christianity, or today it's contemplative Christianity. And the beautiful thing about the renaissance of this knowledge, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that it just blossomed full bloom, you might say, in the High Middle Ages, especially at Chartres, where they actually worked on achieving cosmic consciousness. And all of these beautiful blueprints came together. But I perhaps another time can do that. But it's quite a story in and of itself. Now, these underground traditions have emerged in our time, but they also emerged 700 years after the church censored everything, and all of the destruction took place, the killing and the burning, and it was 700 years later, and the actual blueprint, you might say, the beauty of Christianity and the Jewish shaman mystic tradition, and all of those traditions blossomed. In fact, all of them came together. The alchemical, the Jewish, the Gnostic, the Persian. It was an amazing, amazing story that we now know. It came in the Italian Renaissance, Rosicrucian, and German and Romantic period, and it's back today. So that's the interesting thing, is that it has returned today. And now I'll take just a few more minutes to tell a little bit of a personal part of why I'm involved with this. The book is called Merchants of Light, and I'll tell you how I came to that. In 1990, my mother was killed in an automobile accident. And in 1991, our only child, our son, Pishti, was killed in an automobile accident. And 2 years and a few months later, my husband Istvan was killed in a third automobile accident. But before Istvan was killed, after Pishti died, we experienced his consciousness so profoundly and for quite a long period of time, because he seemed to have a mission to let us know, help us to remember there's no death, that he was fine, and he wanted to help us remember why we had been born, because the earth is going through one of the most powerful transformations. And there were many, many visions that we both had, and I wrote about those in The Miracle of Death. And we were very particular. We knew we'd entered a field that was so profound, so different from anything we'd ever experienced, that we recorded everything we experienced. So that I've tried to be very accurate in the book to tell these visions. But the one I want to tell tonight is I had a vision of Anubis, the Egyptian god Anubis, and in his form of the jackal, because a jackal eats dead food and transforms it in his own body into a living force. And so he was really a symbol of what we have to do today. And but in this vision, after Pishti talked with Istvan about the Anubis as being a symbol of our time, he said, "Dad, look up this hexagram in the I Ching." He didn't give him a number or say what it was. He just said it's straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken, and start from the top. Well, when you through the I Ching, you start from the bottom. And this is the Chinese book of science, which from all apparent information one can get and experience, it was a science of change. And so Istvan said, "Do we still have that? I think in our lives we'd thrown it twice." And I said, "Well, let me go see if I can find it." So I ran into my study. I did find it, came back. And when I found it, I was so shocked I couldn't even read it. I went over to him and sat down by him, and it was 18 coup, work on what has been spoiled or decayed. And we knew that it was this blueprint of who we are, our potential to live and experience universal mind. And I said, "Well, wait a minute. How did you know which hexagram? How did you know straight, broken, broken?" He said, "Oh, he said, that's easy. It's ML, Merchants of Light." Well, Istvan would sometimes come with some funny twists of language out of his Hungarian language, and I thought, that's really funny. Merchants of Light, merchants? And I said, "Well, why that name?" And he said, "It's Merchants of Light because they know how to distill the darkness and decay into light and life." And he said, like merchants, very important that they're merchants. They sell the knowledge of this process for the price of consciousness, and the entire universe profits. Well, I nearly dropped over when he said that. I thought, this is amazing. And he said, he was so excited about it. He said, "There's so many things that ML stands for: mother love, matrix of love, masters of light, and so on." And I thought, for a long time, I just thought he'd come up with it. But I thought it was a little strange, merchants, but I understood it now. But later, after he died, I realized, and he wouldn't have known because Istvan wasn't a reader of the kinds of things I read. I realized that the merchants of light appear in the Renaissance periods. I was absolutely shocked with that. So it has a visionary existence, or maybe even physical. But I want to go back to this. So before I get to that, is that um, it's an energy field. It's an energy field of light that Ishvan said, and I've had that experience myself too, that we all know we want more. We know we're more than we are. We want to know how to live in this vaster, creative, loving universe. And we have called because we want that. We have opened the portals around the earth. And the merchants of light come as an energy field, or people being born on the earth who've already gone through this and they know how to distill the darkness into light and can teach us. Well, I had a vision before Ishvan or Pishti died. We were doing, two other people and I did a ritual for children, for all our children, and for their healing, and for a way that we could give to them the truth about who they are. And so we could create a world in which our children could live lovingly and creatively and independently. And I had a vision that in that time I was doubting everything. And it was no wonder I had a spirit intervention, because I was doubting everything. But a disc of light came through the glass door, and my eyes were closed. It was a visionary world, and over my head, and a feminine being just circled out of it and went right through the crown chakra. And she sang through me. She sang, "We are the light. We are the light circling around your planet. You have called us, and we are here to be with you all three. Can you feel us? Can you feel us? Your planet has called us, and we are here." And then later it sang to all three of us and said, "You have drawn to yourselves this day all those on your planet who are creating worlds of love and peace." I knew through the years of questioning and doubts, I knew that this was real. If nothing else was, this was so real. The power and the energy of it was so profound that I could never forget it. And then they said, "We are ready to connect to your planet." It was as though we all three knew that the longing on the earth, the calling for this light, was intense all around the globe. Everyone who loved had called for this. And the portals had been opened, and the light was connected to the planet. And we knew that it would be easier for us to experience that vaster consciousness, because this was happening on our planet, because the people on the planet longed so deeply and so profoundly for a planet of love and peace. And after Pishti's death, and actually Ishvan's too, I found drawings of Pishti's, and I remembered them once I saw them. When he was a child, young boy, he started drawing a planet with light right around the planet connected to it, and a beam of light coming toward it. And I don't know that Ishvan ever saw them or knew about them, but after Pishti's death, Ishvan had a vision in which Pishti said, we are certain, we are quite sure at least, that we can connect this beam of light to the planet. And then the day after his memorial, I had a vision of a spiral of souls spiraling around and coming down and being born all over the earth. And I knew that they had come. They held this higher consciousness, and we had called them, and they were here. And I'll never forget the statement that was chanting, but they said, "Our brothers and sisters on the earth are dreaming a terrible dream." And that terrible dream, of course, we were dreaming because we lost that deep and profound knowledge of the soul, of who we really are. It was interesting that later I read that Patricia Cotto-Robles' son had the same vision, a spiral of light beings. He said when he was a little boy, "Mom, this is a very special time, and there are thousands of light beings being born on earth who are going to help all of us. I saw them. They are descending from the higher realms, and when they reach the earth, they're going to be born as babies all over the world." And then Peter Donov, not sure I'm getting that right, Donov, he was very much like a Christ figure. He really did live in cosmic consciousness. He was in Bulgaria, and I met a person who learned Bulgarian simply to translate his work. But he's still celebrated, and the dances are done in the high mountains in Bulgaria. But he said, I came to sow the seeds of a new culture of love into a world that has decayed. But he said, there is hope, because the earth is now entering a new energy field of light, which will make it more possible for us to do this. And then I thought this was very interesting. Sri Aurobindo's ashram in India, the mystics told William Irving Thompson that what they knew was happening, especially the mother had experienced that, she was a partner of Aurobindo, that there was as a supramental manifestation of light that has come down from the cosmos and circling the planet, and it will come through each of us. And they say there are no techniques, no gurus to follow. When consciousness is deeply rooted in the heart, the individual is open to and united with this supramental energy that guides each person in his or her own unique evolutionary path. So the blueprint is being created by each person from the heart. It's again, those organizing principles of the soul will guide each one of us, as with our ancestors. But it seems that something very different has happened, that this energy, this light, is coming to help us. And these are just a few. There are a lot of things I tried to mention more in the book, but we are going through a darkness and a decay of our spiritual knowledge, our texts. But everything, I think, is happening. The discovery of our roots in these shaman mystic texts, and the texts themselves, and the new science of quantum physics, and the new work in the brain and the heart. And now I think so many people are experiencing this in the visionary world of light, and that a light beings and a light energy field that can move through us and reorganize us. I mean, it's the organizing principle. You know how it works with a caterpillar. It just is very interesting. There's an organizing field that moves through it and transforms that caterpillar into a butterfly. And I think that's what we're going through. And we're seeing from many, many different sources that the universe is here to help us because we have asked and we are ready. And that's why I think this is the fifth renaissance of this wisdom. And I think that there are so many indications that we can survive and save our planet and ourselves and our children. And that is what I have to say, Bob.
Well, thank you, Betty. That was great. And if you have a question for Dr. Kovacs, you can type it into your question box. I'll read a few of them to you. Do you think that sacred plants are put here by design to help us enter other realms?
You know, I do. And the plants will tell you that. They made it quite clear to me that these plants are sacred beings, spirits, who have come to the earth so that we can learn how to live, of course, in day-to-day life, but that we can remember who we are and become that. That is what they definitely tell us.
Okay. I have a question here. If you're familiar with the work of Professor Claudia von Roelhoff, the comment was that her work was somewhat similar to yours. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I don't, and I can't quite catch what it is, but I would like to have it tell. I will find out.
Okay. Here's a question. It seems like we knew a higher level and then lost so much of that knowledge. Why, as a species, does it seem we go backwards even with the church doing the destruction, it seems as if the knowledge would be more powerful. And then do you think that learning and growing and then forgetting will be cyclical?
You know, what my research shows is that I suppose those of us who are not developed, and I think if we're not developed, we look outside ourselves for power. And there were many in the church. I think they didn't know what the mystics were talking about, and they thought of them as heretics. But I think that when that happens, when people who don't know get in control, then it's easy to lose the truth. For instance, that we have the beautiful teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. And even Eusebius, an early church father, felt that the Jewish therapeutae or Essenes had written these gospels. He knew a group of mystics. But even though he knew that, it still was that the church, many of the church fathers didn't, and they therefore wanted power over us. And that was a way to do it, is that they told us we had to go outside of ourselves rather than to find the Christ within. The Nagamati Christ, of course, taught the opposite. So I think that it's not so much, I guess, forgetting as it is not finding. In Western culture, it's been that those who didn't know wanted something they didn't have. And I think we very often want some kind of power if we don't have it within. And that seemed to destroy their chances for the organization to have power. But the Deuteronomist, I don't know, certainly after the exile, they became even stronger and wrote so much, probably to hold the people together. I'm sure they had their own understanding, but my research shows and experience that it's even less than forgetting, it's being denied the truth through the text that could have awakened us and kept us alive to who we are.
How do we get this knowledge out to the masses? By us being merchants of light as well?
Well, I think that I really think that all of us and the whole planet is filled with people who do long for love and light. And I think that everyone who loves really is changing the planet. But how do we help? How do we relearn what's happening? Well, I think it's a big communal project. I think, because isn't it rather miraculous that all of these scholars just happened to study these particular things in the 20th century? And isn't it interesting that after so many years, we happen to find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that we happen to find the Nagamati texts? It's all of these things that, and then the visionary life that so many people are seeing, that many are coming to help us. So I think, someone called the new science, quantum physics, as the science of the miraculous. I think that's what we're living in. It is the time of the miraculous, and ML, it's miracle lovers. And I think we need to stretch our imaginations. I know that Ishvan had one of his visions was with Pishti, and he was sitting on a mountain with Pishti. They were looking out at the ocean where the sky joined it. And he said, "Dad, even that is not the limit of what we can create." And at that point in my life, immediately I started thinking of limits, well, not this, not that. And I don't do that anymore. And I think that that's what we're being initiated into, a miraculous world. And we will find, I think each of us will find ways of creating that energy in our lives and spreading it in that way. As one way, there are many ways.
And this was something maybe you'd want to comment on. Perhaps having to experience the dark helps us to reinforce the realization of and for light.
Okay, I didn't quite understand that, Bob, because experiencing,
Perhaps, do we have to experience the dark to realize the light?
oh, well, it's such a, it is the part of life, is that we are born into this dimension and then we're born into the other. But I think, you know, the Mayans have a saying, polarity is the loom on which reality is strung. And on that loom is birth and death. And we have to know both in order to know either one. But in Western world, we slice that loom right down the middle. And we talked about birth, but not death, happiness, but not grief. And yes, I think that experiencing the whole of life is playing on the full loom, all of the pairs of opposites. We need to be able to move between these opposites. And that way we know, then we can know both. But if we just know one, all we have is grief with the other because we don't know it's a birth.
Okay. Do you believe in old souls? And would they be the ones on a spiritual path in this lifetime?
Oh, you know, I, I think probably that there are those of us who are young souls and old souls, just like we have young children and old people. It could well be that some of us have been at it longer and some of us have not. Um, but I think that our ancestors would say that we are always on a spiritual path because we are spirit beings, and we just happen to be trying to learn how to create in the physical world, this physical universe. Um, you know, when I had that experience at Machu Picchu, and then suddenly after realizing, oh, I'm it, which we are all it. Uh, no matter young or old souls, we are it, we are divine, we are everything. Then suddenly I saw myself sitting in a forest, and I said to myself, but I can't create a world. And then the spirit voice said to me, you just did create a world in which you cannot create. So I think that when we have these notions about young and old souls, I think that we have to know we are all spirit and we are all creative. And that was what our ancestors wanted us to know. There was a sacred heritage. As a matter of fact, the merchants of light are the ones who wanted to try, that's the name for our ancestors, who wanted to try to save this sacred heritage for us, that we are immortal and we're divine and we're creative. And I never, I, I was so stunned by that. And no, and then the voice continued to say, we can do nothing but create. We can do nothing but create. And indeed, I had created a world in which I couldn't create. So I think we have to create the world we want to live in, and we can create it. A young soul or old soul.
So when we talk about the new discoveries of quantum physics and energy fields, what direction do you see the knowledge of these energies going in the future?
Well, I certainly, if we take quantum physics seriously, and I think we're going to, I just hope it doesn't take us too much time. But it would change everything because quantum physics, in fact, I think I have this in the book that one said, everything has its purpose. And we are working on technologies now as physicists to connect us to the other dimensions of reality. It is our purpose to help all of us achieve higher states of consciousness and to discover soul. Oh, I didn't think I'd ever hear a scientist say that. And it is changing. I think the world is in a process of transforming. And I think now we see a lot of darkness and a lot of loss of heart consciousness. But this has been under just right under the surface for a very long time. We know what we've been doing. At least we're learning what we have been doing as a culture and maybe condoning as people. But this had to come to the surface. This is the process that the merchants of light explain. It must surface so that we can see it and know that we don't want it and know how to transform it. So I see a future with the possibility of a transformed world, with the possibility, but it's always up to us. But I think we have a lot of help, and a lot of it is miraculous help.
Here's one. Thank you for weaving together truths from so many traditions and cultures. As a Christian minister, I too have come to believe that the original Jesus was much more like what you described than what traditional Christianity teaches. Do you often meet resistance from traditional Christians that you know or encounter?
You know, through books I have, but I have not personally. But I do think, I mean, all Christians must surely long for this mystic, loving person that they've come to see in the Gospels. And hopefully to become that. We've been trained and brainwashed to be nothing and to follow and to always look outside ourselves. It's so dangerous. But I don't know personally. I don't know personally, but you know, I like Matthew Fox. I think he's really understood that very well, and others. I just don't know them personally.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we've reached the end of our time. It was wonderfully enlightening. I want to remind everybody that this new book, Merchants of Light, besides being very comprehensive in scope, it's a journey back in history, and it gives you all the spiritual implications for the future. So it's highly recommended. It's wonderful reading, and we recommend that you pick up a copy. I will, for those of you who want to hear more of Dr. Kovács, she will be on Signs of Life Radio being interviewed tomorrow night, and you could link to the radio broadcast via the Forever Family Foundation website. I also wanted to mention for those who missed it, those interested in attending the Grief Retreat in Florida in January, there's a $50 coupon for those who attended the webinar. Use the code MERCHANTS50, that's MERCHANTS50. There's also a super early bird special pricing now that ends on Monday, so you can take advantage of both those things if you act quickly. We thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and we thank Dr. Kovács for the wonderful research and work that she's done and for this presentation. So good night, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.